Part 1. Tools. These tools will help to equip you for the challenges ahead. They unlock ancient wisdom and reveal patterns imperceptible to the naked eye. They will prepare you to expect the unexpected and find a safe path through disaster. 1. Bug-out bag. If you had 24 hours to evacuate your home, what would you grab? What if it was 8 hours? What if it was 1 hour? What if you had to leave right now? Each time frame would have a significant impact on how you prioritize and value your possessions. The other question to ask is why? Are you leaving due to a flood or fire? Or is it an imminent invasion of zombies, aliens, or foreign nationals? Are you leaving due to religious persecution? Is it because the power grid will be down, or because your city is about to be obliterated by a nuclear bomb? The other question to ask is, where will you go? How far do you have to flee? Is your house in danger? Is it your city, your state, or your nation? Is this a solo evacuation, or will you be fleeing with a mass of refugees? These variables can quickly produce an enormous number of contingent scenarios that make it impossible to adequately prepare for an emergency. As a personal example, the first thing I might consider is These variables can quickly produce an enormous number of contingent scenarios that will make it impossible to adequately prepare for an emergency. As a personal example, the first thing I might consider is what the conditions driving out of our city might be. Do I want to cram a few important items into our minivan and stick close to my family, or can my wife and I take 2 cars? If we can only take 1 car, it is better to take the minivan, which is safer for the kids on congested roads. Or would it be better to try to cram everyone in my work truck with a covered bed, a power inverter, and lots of handy tools that could be used for building shelter? Are we heading towards another corner of civilization or into the unknown wilderness? How serious would things have to be to convince my wife to let the big kids build a mobile pillow fort in the bed of our truck? Would I have enough time to hitch up our little trailer on the back just to grab as much useful stuff as possible? Or does everything come down to a single emergency bag? This emergency item, called a bug-out bag, often lives in the trunk of a car, and it's supposed to hold the most vital survival equipment. Most people who have one tend to be fairly paranoid, since the term bug-out refers to a sudden and complete drop off the grid. Updating the bug-out bag with the coolest new survival items is probably more of a post-apocalyptic fantasy LARP than a truly wise investment, but thinking about survival contingencies is not an unhealthy practice. How and what you focus on will vary from person to person. I've thought more about packing our vehicles and evacuating the city because I've already decided that fleeing is better than fighting in most scenarios. It's good to have something for self-defense, but guns aren't much help against floods, fires, or earthquakes. They aren't particularly helpful during power outages or deep freezes either. What about valuables? Jewelry and precious metals are easy enough to grab, but what about important documents, heirlooms, and sentimental items? Most of my personal investment have been in tools, guitars, and books. Each has a certain amount of value and utility that could earn them a bit of real estate, depending on how much time and how much space we have before we leave. If society brands me an outcast, they will be vital parts of my new gypsy lifestyle. If they brand me a public enemy, they become dead weight. Of course, the most vital needs for survival are food, water, and shelter. There's a lot of emergencies where those needs are easily met with a Visa card, but it's always good to have a few emergency provisions on hand. And this is where those contingencies really make things difficult to figure out. Water is heavy and takes up a lot of space. Is a 40-pack of water bottles enough to get by, or do I need some heavy-duty jugs? Is dehydration a serious survival risk, or just going without a shower? Maybe it's better to invest in a water filter. The Berkey-style tank on our counter removes chemicals and improves taste, but will it handle muddy creek water? Will I need to resort to that? What about food? Are we going to raid the pantry for protein bars and granola? Are we packing canned food and dry goods? Should I try to load the deep freezer into the back of my truck? Some scenarios might be solved by a trip through the drive-thru, while others might mean packing seeds to plant a garden. What do you do about pets? The bunnies that live in our backyard would be fine without our care, unless we are fleeing from a natural disaster. We would always want to bring our dogs and cats, but even the best-loved critters have been known to lose their status as family members under dire enough circumstances. These things all fall along a spectrum where time, space, and energy can cause us to drastically reevaluate our priorities and needs. A packet of seeds contains a vast quantity of nutrition, given enough time and space. But you can't wait for beans to grow when you're dying of starvation. Are flashlights and batteries a better choice than matches and lighters? When is a survival fire starter necessary? What about clothes, medicine, and hygiene products? It quickly becomes apparent that no normal person can plan for every possible disaster. Those who can afford it are placing themselves at risk of theft and violence. What is the solution? Just pretend that things will go on the same as they always have? That will work fine, right up until the moment it doesn't. Catastrophic disasters may be rare, but the surest way to increase their likelihood is to ignore the small problems that precede them. Despite our attraction to frontier fantasies, the most crucial survival tool is always the one that gets us back into a functional community. Without understanding the communal nature of human beings, we will always be stuck on the edge of survival. Whatever you stock up on, whether useful things like food and medicine, or novelties and trinkets, its greatest value is found in forging friendships. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Use wisdom to prepare as best you can. Don't be caught unaware. But don't let the fear of the unknown rule you. Prepare in the ways that make the most sense according to your strengths. But perhaps, most importantly, cultivate the virtues of kindness and generosity. I can't afford a year's supply of food, but if I bring the dried goods from my pantry, perhaps someone else can provide the water and heat to make a meal. The meat in our deep freezer won't last long without power, but maybe it can fill my neighbors' bellies long enough to carry them through the panic of a sudden disaster. Hunger makes people forget. For is what happens before, and get is to grasp or acquire. When people forget, they take before thinking or asking. When their needs are met, they remember. Is to repeat, to do it again. Member is to be united, the members of your family or of your body. To remember brings your mind and your body back together, and to remember your relationships with others brings the community back together as well. Human relationships are just as prone to disasters as our physical environment. When we spend the time and energy worrying about everything that can go wrong between our neighbors and ourselves, we find that there are just as many variables as wilderness survival. Our bug-out bag isn't big enough to prevent or fix every outcome. There is one tool that can prepare us for the dangers of the unknown: the ability to forgive. Forgiveness can act as the duct tape of societal relationships, but it is also the key to personal survival. The key is to recognize when to apply it. Just as disaster causes people to forget taking what they want before they have earned it, forgiveness is the act of giving before the need arises. When you look at whatever you have, your modest belongings, your roof, your jacket, your lunch, and decide to let it go, before someone ever asks or takes it, you free yourself from the biggest threats of societal destruction: fear, anxiety, envy, jealousy, lust, and hatred. All vanish when you loosen or release your own vision of the future. This is by no means an easy thing to do. It's probably the most difficult thing. The willingness to truly forgive means honestly facing your worst fears and embracing them. This willingness is the central defining characteristic of the person of Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a slave, by looking like other men, and by sharing in human nature. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus' life is the visible, tangible expression of God emptying himself to become human. He did this at such a time that people had forgotten so much of their own past to allow them to remember. His willingness to forgive, demonstrated on the cross, is the sacrifice that still binds us together in far more ways than we realize. Scholars still remember what happened before and after the common era that divides the timeline in our history books. Toy makers still proclaim the name of Christ to move their products each Christmas. Even those who claim no religion will put their faith in the symbol of the Red Cross when disaster strikes. There's countless more examples of how the memory of Jesus' sacrifice and the ongoing work inspired by his example continues to bring people back together. His intention is that we remember as often as we sit down to eat. So when you pack your bug-out bag, don't forget to remember, forgiveness goes in before all the rest.